Welcome to Uganda.
Production funding is provided by the Natural Resources Institute at the University of Manitoba through a UPCD grant from Canadian International Development Agency and AUCC, and by the members of Prairie Public.
I'm currently wrapping up a 6-year CETA project in Uganda where we're working to enhance rural livelihoods with sustainable tourism. Agriculture has always been the #1 industry in Uganda, but tourism is a very close #2. The concept is that by providing incomes based on the wildlife capital of Uganda, local people will generate income and therefore support conservation initiatives in the country. Since I've been coming to Uganda, I've been able to witness a significant amount of deforestation. Certainly, my first trip here, I remember seeing primary rainforest almost all the way from Mubende to Fort Portal. On my most recent trip, pretty much all of that primary rainforest is gone and turned over to cropland. Now, I can't speak for how far beyond the road that extends, but it certainly extends as far as the eye can see. And it seems to be having a significant effect on the weather, the climate. It seems to be the rainy seasons have changed. People are saying it's hotter, they can't count on the rains, and that's having significant impact on people's livelihoods as well. To think about how much rainforest this country's lost and how many wildlife have disappeared as a result of it, and the threat that it puts on the wildlife that remains, because essentially they're now contained within small islands of habitat that they can't really escape from. As soon as they leave those islands of habitat, they're on cropland and they may be killed as pests. So it creates very strong stresses on the wildlife populations. So generating income from wildlife and showing that wildlife can help people improve their standard of living is really important. But it is really important that the local people benefit. I mean, there's a real inequitable distribution of costs and benefits when we talk about wildlife conservation globally. Typically, the benefits are accrued in a very general sense to the Western world, where we want to save the rainforest, where we want to see wildlife species preserved forever. And yet the costs of preserving them are absorbed locally by the farmers and the small-scale individuals in these developing countries, as it sometimes limits their ability to develop and do what they want to do. We currently have 3 community projects. They're in various stages of development. The first community that we defined a project for was Ruhija in Bwindi Impenetrable Forest National Park. We were actually doing an analysis in Winnipeg trying to determine which communities we were going to be working with when we received a phone call from Ugandan Wildlife Authority letting us know that Ruhija was going to be opened up for gorilla tourism. It's really quite an exciting opportunity. Really nothing quite like it. I think it's really important that people think, why am I paying this amount of money to see gorillas? Well, there's one gorilla on the planet for every 10 million human beings, just to give people a sense of how rare they actually are. Ruhija had previously not had any tourists other than a few birders coming through. Tourists didn't stay there, and we knew that once gorillas were habituated in the area and tourists started coming, there'd be a bit of a land rush. So we immediately engaged the community to say, what is it you'd like to do as a tourism initiative? And through a process of a number of community meetings, group workshops, we came to the concept that the first thing we would fund was a community tented camp. The largest is the Ruhija Gorilla Friends Community Rest Camp, which was the first one to be funded. As a condition of funding, 20% ownership of the Gorilla Friends tented camp belongs to the community at large to help fund other initiatives in the community. When we first engaged the community and the discussion came up that they wanted to provide hospitality and housing for tourists coming to the community, they'd run off and built a couple of concrete block structures that were really local type of accommodation, the kind of thing you would see in Uganda as a local hotel that locals would use, but really entirely unsuitable to the tourist market. And so we worked with them. We took them on a number of familiarization tours where we took them to other tented camps. And throughout that process, their eyes were really opened as to the kind of accommodation that the tourists would be looking for, would appreciate, and what they might be able to provide to them as well.
Initially, the people are a bit apprehensive when you are being mobilized to start such a project.
People expected immediate returns. And so it's easy to get a little bit pessimistic about the possibilities, the outcomes, and how things will come to fruition. And I guess if anything surprised me was how quickly that opposition was overcome. Once we finally had the Ruhija Guerrilla Friends group contributing that 20% that's owned by the community back to community initiatives, we saw some really rapid transformation. Really heartening to see it happen, because now we know the community really supports the initiative and they're working hard to make other endeavors work.
Most of these kind of projects that are common goods, they create a kind of ownership to the whole community. And I think because of the Makerere University and University of Manitoba and CEDA, the advertisements and what they have kind of helped us gain more kind of tourists that come to us.
When 2008, the tented camp finally opened. In its first year, being a short year, it only opened in November, so we had November, December, they had 24 visitors. In 2009, they had 86 visitors, and in 2010, last year for which I have figures, they had 314 visitors. So they're doing quite well. And if you consider how much money is generated by this particular initiative, in Uganda generally, average annual income is around $200 per year. They generate $50 per person per night at the tented camp. And if you have 300 nights and you do the math, you can figure out that's a substantial amount of income for people living in a rural community. Just this past November, the first installment, 20%, went back to the larger community group. So they're now at the stage where they've been able to reinvest in the tented camp. They were able to add a number of developments that we hadn't first initiated ourselves. They're building a new self-contained tent, which means it will have its own washroom, shower facility. They built a couple of new water tanks. They've built a water heater and a gravity feed for the showers. So things are moving along quite well. Beyond the actual tented camp that was developed in partnership with the Ruhija Guerrilla Friends group, we're starting to see downstream linkages. We're starting to see some of the supply chain in terms of food and other goods developing within the community. So the community members who may not be engaged directly with the tented camp are producing food that is sold through the camp. We're seeing community trails beginning to be developed through the larger umbrella organization of Ruhija, the Ruhija Tourism Development Organization that was also developed as part of the project. They've trained bird guides. We sent a trainer up here who trained anyone in the community interested in beekeeping, beekeeping management, and product development.
It's wonderful today. It is wonderful day today. So it is wonderful today.
There's also Ruhija Orphans and Needy Children's Group that's been put together by a young woman in the community by the name of Happy.
And we entertain clients in music, dance, and drama.
Life can be difficult in parts of Africa. A lot of the children here are orphans.
They came to become orphans. Sometimes their parents died of HIV, and others died in accidents.
Some of the orphans are considered single orphans, that is, they have only one parent, and others are from families that really can't provide for them. The children will show up at the camp, provide entertainment, and then generally the tourists will provide some money to support the initiative. Given that tourists are coming to the community, we're starting to see some collateral development as well. We're seeing gift shops opening up on the main street. What is really interesting about this, though, and I think that differentiates it from some other communities where we've seen collateral, or what other people might call coattail development, because now you have tourists, people set up shop to sell things, is there's really a limited amount of space on the main street of Ruhija in which to set up these shops. And so as a result, while there is no formal planning structure, there is an overarching ownership where community members own the land on this ridge. So it's very difficult for outsiders to come in and open up these shops, which therefore then contributes to the local economy. What we're not seeing is outside groups coming in, setting up shops, and then earning income and taking it away. So the income generated from all of these operations is actually staying in the community. And again, because of that, the community has a greater appreciation for the park and more interested in conserving the biodiversity in the park that really forms the foundation of this sort of renewed economic activity in the community. In Kibale National Park, many of the communities surrounding the park are agricultural. And Kibale National Park is known for its primate population, which are fairly clever animals, and which frequently raid crops. So that it sets up a fairly significant conflict between local communities and wildlife in the park. And when a monkey comes out of the park and eats the vegetables in a garden, the park monkeys have caused damage to people's property. But by developing income based upon that wildlife and having the people recognize that their income is coming because tourists are coming to visit the wildlife, they become more tolerant of some of these activities. There's a strong community champion in Kyanyawara who really set the stage for things moving forward.
When you look at our country, Uganda, employment opportunities are very limited, especially for a woman.
Margaret has organized the community members, the women in her community, into craft development groups. She has over 250 women working in her group, producing crafts for sale at zoos across North America and for a very short period of time in Banff National Park as well.
These are some of the baskets we make. It is made out of millet straws, raffia, and the dyes you can get them from around the bushes, available from the forest. We do it in such a sustainable way, and we keep in mind conservation. My plan also is to put up a structure, like a building for the women, so that every piece of their work is very displayed, well marketed.
The next stage of that particular project is to help Margaret develop marketing opportunities outside of Uganda, because some of the crafts that they produce in their community are truly some of the best in Uganda.
We make some of the jewelry from paper beads, and the colors are determined by the kind of paper we get. Anyone who finds it difficult to get employment, they try to make crafts to bring to the project. I don't look at my project for income generating only. There are so many ways how I think the project can benefit the people around it. Fighting women's rights, support children education. I'm so happy because when I started, I was not expecting this level, which means there is a need. I want to get more people involved. Otherwise, I cannot do it alone.
There's a second group in Kibale, the research assistants at the Makerere University field station. At this time, they've successfully initiated an apiary where they have beehives. They've begun a tree plantation for native trees for use for medicinal purposes, and they're considering the development of a trail in the Dura swamp.
Those members from Cedar Makerere told us we should choose a project which can make us benefit very fast. So among the projects we chose the beehives. These beehives are laid in the national park. So we got some permission from the park that we are laying our beehives there for some time. Then after we transfer to our apiary. The honey we are getting, we are planning to sell it to people in the community, or we take it for bottle, or we export it if we have it in big quantity. Okay, this one, we can get like 20 kilos from it. That's how our trainer told us. This is how these beehives are made. After getting in here, they start building their combs here. Then the whole of this, you find it's full of honey. The place you are seeing here is our apiary site. All the beehives, after colonizing, they are supposed to come here. This is the land we got from our patron. He gave it for free. We are not paying for it, but we have a memorandum of understanding with him. He gave it to us for 5 years. You can see this apiary, it's being fenced with the barbed wire. One of the reasons we are trying to stop some wild animals, like elephants, maybe some domestic animals like goats.
Beekeeping, you do not need to destroy natural environment. The bees come, they colonize your hives, you harvest the honey, you sell, get the money without harming the environment. So it is one of the most friendly projects in as far as conservation is concerned. Encouraging growing of indigenous trees is very, very important.
These trees you are looking at, they are called Wabugia ugandensis. In case you have cough, you have to eat some of the leaves of this tree, then you get cured. We collected the seedlings from the forest. We didn't plant the seeds.
We're also trying to get other seeds from the park to make sure that we get as many species as possible.
This is one of the species that we are raising up also. This is Prunus africana. The back of it, you cut it, then you cook it. In case you have some malaria or fever, it can also help you. It's a medicinal plant also.
We are going to work hard to make sure that these projects grow and be useful to us and be useful to the community and promote conservation at the end.
The third project is occurring in Katunguru, which is in Queen Elizabeth National Park. It's actually right on the border of the park. It's a small fishing community, and it has very, very low educational capacity. Very few people in the community have completed even primary 6. There's only a few people in the community who speak English, and it's been a real challenge to develop a proposal for them that would allow them to engage in tourism, and certainly in international tourism, because it's pretty much a requirement that somebody speak English, German, Italian, or French in order to engage with the tourists. Early on in our discussions with that group, we were able to work with the Ugandan Wildlife Authority and got permission for them to operate a boat launch on the channel, which had the potential to generate a lot of income, but would be very costly to get started and very difficult to bring that community up to the capacity where they'd be able to manage it. It's still there as a possibility for the future as they begin developing other initiatives, and it'll likely take place in terms of a public-private partnership where we'll have them work with one of the local lodging operators to help manage it and ensure that it works in a sustainable fashion. But for the time being, the women actually decided what they'd like to do and what they felt comfortable doing was taking some of the land that they have been given by the park, rehabilitating it, it's a former sand and gravel quarry, and turning it into a hostel for Ugandan school children who visit the park, which seems like a very good idea given the fact that they speak the local language. The students from the Ugandan schools will be speaking the local language, and they won't have to raise the expectations in terms of what their deliverables are. School kids visit the national parks in part to develop an appreciation for Uganda's nature amongst its own population, in the hopes that they will want to conserve nature and generally support the national park system. When we first came to Uganda to begin working, when we were initially funded for the project, we set up a meeting in Kampala with the entire project team from Makerere University, University of Manitoba, and then we invited community partners. And we asked them to sit in a room and work with us to identify what they thought was, first of all, the set of knowledge that tour professionals should have, the attitudes that a tour professional should have, and essentially the characteristics and interpersonal skills that tour professionals should have. And based on those elements, we defined the ideal tour professional and started to build that into the curriculum.
The program is training people in the tourism industry. Having trained personnel in the industry means we are going to even be able to handle our tourists even more, and that is sustainability.
They wanted critical thinkers. They wanted people who could think on their feet. They didn't want people who were just going to spit answers back to them that they read in a book. They wanted them to be able to work in the field. So a big component of that was having an extensive field component for students. So the students now on our master's degree spend at least a month, up to 4 months, working with a community, developing tourism product and understanding the tourism industry in that particular community.
Tourism in Uganda is nature-based, where we rely most on wildlife. Managing wildlife means managing tourism.
We're averaging about 5 students a year coming into the program, but in addition to the master's students, we also are training 3 PhD students. And those PhD students are doing their PhDs at Makerere, but we've got Commonwealth scholarships to bring them to Canada for 6 months of intensive research and training. And one of those students is in Canada right at this very time.
I'm studying mainly conservation and tourism in Canadian perspective. Which practice I have to adopt and which philosophy I need to know so that I can use it to improve tourism and conservation techniques in Uganda.
Through conservation education, we'll empower communities to better understand the resources they neighbor in protected areas and also be able to earn some income to support their families.
I'm seeing a bright future for Uganda. If these projects continue, we are going to elevate tourism to another level in the country.
If there is anything blocking us, the way we promote our country, the way we market it, the markets are there, but we are not trying so hard to try and sell our country as a tourist destination.
Uganda suffers something of an image problem. For people of my generation, all we think of when we hear the word Uganda is Idi Amin. For people of the younger generation, they think of HIV/AIDS. And then generally people think it's unsafe. Uganda is probably the safest country in Africa right now. The Ugandan people are warm, open, friendly, incredibly happy to see tourists in their country.
When we see a visitor, there's something in us that prompts us to love that person, make that person comfortable, and not fear anything.
There really is no part of the country that it isn't safe to travel in. The most recent statistics from the Ugandan Tourism Board show that about 1 million, close to 1 million tourists, maybe 800,000, 900,000, visited in 2011. And those numbers have increased almost tenfold since the late 1990s. So numbers of tourists are increasing rapidly. Some of our research shows, however, that a lot of those tourists aren't the typical nature-based tourism. About 50% of them are actually here as volunteers, working in the country with NGOs, religious organizations, etc. And probably only about 25% are actual nature tourists. So what that says to me is that there's tremendous potential to expand the nature-based tourism offerings in Uganda, and particularly when you think about the bird population. They have over 1,100 species of birds in a very, very tiny country. And it's very easy for people to add immeasurable numbers to their life lists. And I don't think Uganda yet is doing as good a job as it could in marketing itself as a birding destination. We know that birding is a huge industry, and people across the globe spend a lot of money to travel and see birds. And I think Uganda is probably one of the best places on the planet to come and see birds.
There is a lot to see in Uganda, and I would very much encourage people out there to come and visit Uganda and see for themselves how beautiful it is, and know that truly this is the pearl of Africa.
To order a DVD copy of Uganda Sustainable Tourism, please call 1-800-359-6900 or visit our online store at prairiepublic.org.
Production funding is provided by the Natural Resources Institute at the University of Manitoba through a UPCD grant from Canadian International Development Agency and AUCC, and by the members of Prairie Public.